Hi, and welcome to our presentation here at Global Azure Austria. My name is William Assaf. I'm a senior content developer for the SQL Docs team at Microsoft. Joining me today in the chat to help with Q&A is my colleague Cheryl Adams. On the SQL Docs team, we often end up working more with the product teams than with each other. So it's nice when we get to work together on a presentation like this. We're open to fielding your questions in YouTube or Discord. And though we're on the SQL Docs team, today we're talking about all Microsoft technologies, all Microsoft documentation. On the SQL Docs team, my areas of focus are SQL Performance, Big Data Clusters, Polybase, Azure Synapse Analytics, and Azure SQL Database. Cheryl is over high availability, installation, backup, and restore for SQL Server. But again, we're talking about all Microsoft documentation for all technologies, especially Azure. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation because you in the technical community are our target audience for this presentation. So thanks for joining us. Here's today's agenda. We're going to introduce Devrel. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks in Microsoft Docs that you might not be aware of. And most importantly, how to contribute to Microsoft's open source Docs as code approach in GitHub. First thing you need to know is that you need a github.com account to contribute if you don't have one already. Throughout this presentation, feel free to add your questions to the chat at any time. So we're on the SQL Docs team, and internally, affectionately, we're known as Rogue One. And so when we're not violating multiple copyright laws with this image, we support tens of thousands of articles about SQL Server. We work with the product groups and the program managers for everything SQL Server, including all its various flavors in Azure, as well as Azure Synapse Analytics and the technologies under that umbrella, and all the open source databases as well that are supported. We also cover content for data platform tooling like SQL Server Management Studio and Azure Data Studio. But we're just one content team. And again, today we're talking about how this approach works for all Microsoft Docs and all technologies. So a bit about our mission statements and the hundreds of employees in content and learning at Microsoft. In short, we have two missions. One, we want to enable students, job seekers, and workers online with great content. Two, we want to build an active community of contributors to ensure that we offer a breadth and depth of content to those audiences that need it. Well, that second goal, that's why we're here today doing this presentation. We want to communicate specifically how you can be a part of a quality Microsoft Docs experience. Microsoft Docs are not Wikipedia, so it's not open to all edits, but we do have hundreds of thousands of articles. And we want to embrace the wisdom of you in the technical user community to help us maintain a high level of quality. Opening the docs up to external contributors is how we scale. So the SQL Docs team is just one of many Docs teams for many different products in Microsoft's Cloud and AI Devrel. So what is Devrel? Developer relations. In a greater role is the team that involves activities that connect developers and in-house manufactured goods and services with external users. So Devrel ensures that products establish a good continuous relationship with external developers through mutual communication. Devrel definitely involves docs, documentation, but also reference documentation for how to call APIs, how to use code samples. Devrel in other companies might also look like community management, issue reporting and triage, release notes, focus groups, and public interaction. Your favorite video game, for example, has Devrel folks to send and receive communication with the public about doc reports, bug reports, troubleshooting, patch notes, discussion, mods, things like that. Devrel folks are technical and they know the products well. In fact, some tech companies cycle developers in and out of Devrel so that Devrel folks have a keen awareness of technical detail, but also so that developers see how the end user consumes their products and the communication. So at Microsoft, Devrel teams have a strong technical background from consulting or support positions. Typically, most of us have experience with project management, technical writing, blogging, and book writing as well. And then finally, Devrel is a strategic advantage for product teams because this type of outreach enhances adoption and provides authentic community engagement that goes beyond marketing and social media. Microsoft feels like its Devrel is a strategic advantage over competitors. So in a way, Devrel is not marketing to CIOs and CEOs. It's marketing to developers, to sysadmins, to technical folks like you. There are products out there that we've all used, and we continue to use them because we've had good documentation and support experiences. We had easy adoption, smooth learning curves. That's what I'm talking about. That's what Devrel provides. So in that spirit of authentic community involvement, let's dive in. All right, we're going to talk about Microsoft Docs and some tips and tricks on how to use them real quick. Where it makes sense, the same document might include different information for different versions of the product mentioned. We may also use the same article with various versions of content for Windows versus Linux, or different releases of the product, or different Azure implementations of the product. This on the bottom left, for example, is a code snippet of the Markdown code. We'll talk about Markdown a lot later, of how one article might display different content depending on the version that you've requested. If a doc doesn't look quite right because of a version-specific detail, take a look at the version you're in. You can see this in the URL or in the header of the article file if it's got version-specific content. That version drop-down list in the top left-hand corner above the table of contents might come in handy. It also affects the table of contents by including or excluding certain articles. Sometimes we'll handle versioning via tabs inside the document, and the applies to row at the top of the article, or colorful note boxes that make you know what platform or version that the article covers. Also note that for content that's specific to older versions, like in our example, older versions of SQL Server, we still have ways to access that old content, even though some of them might be through offline docs only. We'll talk about that in a sec. And while we support content for all supported versions of SQL Server, this is specific to SQL Server, just a friendly reminder that SQL 2012, the extended support for that ends next summer in July of 2022. So if you're still running any SQL 2012 instances, it's time to get a migration and upgrade plan in place for the next year. So just to give you a map around specific doc navigation, some of the features that we have, I'm not going to explain every button, but some of the things to look out for. The bookmark button allows you to save links to important references, things that may be useful. You might use this if you, like you're a student and you don't have the same machine to work on all the time. If you have to move from machine to machine, you can log in and you can have access to bookmarks inside the Docs website. You're going to see two search boxes. The first at the top right searches the entire technology stack that you're in. For example, Azure. The table of contents on the left covers many different articles, and it's here that it's best to search titles inside a given table of contents. Then over on the right, you'll see navigation for the document itself. And then those header links that you can click on the right, those are linkable directly if you want to send a colleague a link to a heading inside the document specifically. Or you can hover on a heading and see that link graphic appear, and then click and copy the URL with the page anchor inside the URL. So speaking of Management Studio, not a lot of people are aware of this, but when you have any text highlighted and you hit F1, this also works in SQL Server Data Tools or Visual Studio, and you hit F1, assuming your workstation has access to the internet, the browser might bring you to the corresponding article. It should bring you to the corresponding article for the word of syntax that you have highlighted. If you have selected the help preference of open in browser in Visual Studio, it should bring you right to the Microsoft Docs Online article, in this case for a dynamic management view in SQL Server. If you hit F1 on something that you have highlighted in Visual Studio and or Management Studio, kind of the same thing, and it does not bring you to the right article or to the article you expected, that actually might be a docs issue. That's a metadata issue, and maybe that's something you could file a Git issue for later on. So if your work environment is behind an air-gapped network, and there's many reasons for this, including the Microsoft Department of Defense project, for example, or other high security environments, like a nuclear power plant or something like that, you can download the version-specific docs offline through Management Studio, for SQL Server, of course. Our documentation is actually that strategic advantage against competitors in very large organizations, including the public sector and some large private sector companies on top of the Fortune list. They want their development environments internal and secured from the public internet. So in the case of Microsoft documentation for SQL Server and Power BI and Azure and a lot of other products, our documentation can be easily downloaded periodically and then hosted internally to those environments and downloaded through the GitHub tools, through pulling the latest code down, so that you can get the best of both worlds: a secure network for development and access to fresh online documentation. So some of our competitors, they just want to deliver like a few 100,000 PDFs in a zip file or some scraped website images. I mean, come on, man. This is the way to do documentation. So let me pause here and see if there's any questions in the chat. If not, I'll keep rolling. All right. We'll have plenty of time for a Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so how do you contribute to Microsoft Docs? There's three main ways. The first is through the feedback channel, the product feedback channel. We'll talk about that. The second is through Git issues. And since this whole thing is still inside GitHub, you can create a pull request yourself, just as if you were contributing to any other open source project. Contributing can be done easily through the browser without having to learn Git Bash or install anything, and without having to know what a fork or a clone or a push or a pull is. If you already work with Git or GitHub and you're familiar with pull requests and have remote repositories, you can do that. And later, we'll talk about how this process works behind the scenes. But in the case of SQL Docs, the team that we work on, a lot of DBAs are not familiar with Git or GitHub. That's not a problem. Anyone can help easily through the browser only on github.com. We even have a step-by-step tutorial at this URL here to guide you through the process of creating a PR. We're obviously going to cover that today. By contributing to Microsoft Docs for any product technology, you can be a part of the community to help edit docs that everyone uses. We'll talk about that contributor designation on the top of the article, where we average 16 million page views per month across all our doc sets. And you can use this entirely in the browser with nothing to install, promise. You are going to get an inside peek in this presentation at the process behind Microsoft's Docs as Code approach. Content teams like ours, all across all technologies, integrate with product teams. We join their support reviews and their team meetings. We coordinate on their release schedules, and then we release the Docs as Code. So let's walk through it. So what's a bug? To be clear, support issues don't belong in document feedback. Similarly, the product feedback channel is also not for support issues. The feedback options we're about to discuss are not Microsoft support. They have no SLA for response time. If you're having a problem or an unexpected behavior or an outage, contact Microsoft support or your support partner provider. We triage incoming issues and pull requests from GitHub, and if it sounds like an issue, your issue will likely be closed up with a polite message and some links. Most doc issues that get attention are to request a fix for something that's missing or outdated or wrong, or a request to add something that would have helped prevent an error or an outage. So first idea, if you've got something to improve documentation, you have three options. First, product feedback or suggestions or reproducible bug reports. These actually don't go in the doc system. That's for support, or you can use the feedback tool. If you've been around a few years, you might remember the Connect system with Connect items. A few years ago, those were all migrated to feedback.azure.com, and that portal, that's the place for comments and suggestions for the products. That's external to us on the docs teams, actually, but that's where a lot of really great usability ideas and bug reports come from, and it's open to the public. To give feedback on this product, the document will probably have a little gray box that says submit and view feedback for this product. You click this product button at the bottom of the page, and that'll bring you to the page in feedback.azure.com. So for example, here's the SQL Server page of feedback.azure.com, where you can submit comments and suggestions and vote on other people's ideas. You might see some of these links on social media for when someone has a really good suggestion and wants to get the product team's attention with a lot of votes in favor. You see here, there's a dark theme for SQL Server Management Studio. A lot of DBAs, I think, myself included, are hoping we get that one day. So, second way, through Git issues or GitHub issues specifically. Let's say you've got a documentation issue to suggest. Think of this as just letting us know something's wrong, go fix it. We have goals to address these issues in a timely manner, but we'll be honest, issues are triaged and might take days or weeks to get a satisfactory resolution. Not all issues become a doc change. To create an issue, use that same little gray box and you can click on this page that you see at the bottom of the page, and that will bring you to a new issue screen. Throw your comments in there, give it a title, hit submit new issue, and the docs team will take it from there. Oh, and if you weren't aware, GitHub has a dark mode. If you're a dark mode enthusiast like me, it's very nice. You can use the chat. How many of you are on board with the dark mode websites like I am? I know some people aren't. That's okay. So you can change this in GitHub by when you're logged into github.com, you go to your profile page, you click that little button, and a kitty cat appears. Also, if you're an enthusiast for dark mode websites, docs.microsoft.com, the website we're talking about today, has a dark theme too. You can scroll to the bottom, check out the footer. There's a theme button there. You can change it to dark. And then I also hear that dark mode is coming to Microsoft Word and LinkedIn as well. So I'm very excited about that. Okay, back to contributing. Enough about dark mode. Third option, you've got a documentation issue and you want to suggest the edits yourself. You can click on the edit button in the top right-hand corner where I've got boxed in red right there. So clicking the edit button on a doc brings you to the GitHub Preview page for that article. From here, click the pencil button in the top right-hand corner that I've got boxed in red right here. After you click that pencil button, you're now looking at the actual Markdown code in a text edit box. So all the docs most of the docs are in Markdown. What's Markdown? Markdown is a real simple, lightweight text markup language created for formatting rich text, but with a plain text editor. This is a plain text editor. GitHub has their own formal implementation of Markdown called GitHub Flavored Markdown. Many different online sites use Markdown for their content, including GitHub, but also GitLab, Reddit, Stack Exchange, Bitbucket, Drupal, and a lot more. So you might already be more familiar with Markdown than you think. So make your changes to the article here. If you're not familiar with Markdown, it's pretty easy to understand once you get rolling. And don't worry about it being formatted perfectly. The content team will always review your submission and potentially tweak it to Microsoft standards before it's merged live. There are plenty of resources online for basic Markdown syntax, but if you don't get something quite right with the formatting, don't sweat it. You can use the preview changes feature here that I've got boxed in red to see a preview of the Markdown you're formatting. And then at the very bottom, once you've made your changes to that edit box, here you have a chance to commit your new changes. So enter a pull request title. It populates an easy one for you there. Give it a description, and you can throw in ping Microsoft Docs as a hashtag, and that's just waving hi to the team. We'll talk more about that later. You can also use the same hashtag on Twitter just to wave hi at us if you've got a content submission you want to draw attention to. Then choose the second radio button, actually the only radio button you can choose, to create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request. Unlike some open source projects, we actually don't allow you to commit code directly to the live repository. That's expected, not a surprise. You'll notice that it gives you a new branch with a simple name, just your username, patch, and then a number. That's fine. Don't worry about that. And if you're not familiar with any of the GitHub terminology like branch or pull request, don't worry. You don't have to be. Once you hit the green button there, you submit your pull requests by hitting the green button there. We'll take it from there, and we'll keep you updated as your pull request moves through the process. Your changes to the Markdown file will be proposed for merge, triaged, and then reviewed by the article's author and its reviewers. The content team for the article takes it from there. It'll reply to the PR and comments, make edits if necessary, and then eventually perhaps merge the code in. You'll be notified along the way via emails with feedback directly from one of us on a content team. Again, you can do all of this if you want through your own tooling. You can create your own fork of the repository, clone it, create a branch for your working set, commit it, push, and then create a pull request. That's what we and the content teams do every day. But if you don't know how to do any of that, that's okay. You can just use github.com, use the website to handle the entire process for you. It's actually much easier. So here's what it looks like after you've submitted your pull request. Your pull request will start in an open status, but you can see this one is already merged, which means it's been accepted. It's been pushed to the preview repo, where soon it will be merged into the live production website. You see that purple bubble at the top left-hand corner there. You can see what GitHub did for us was to automatically in the background create a fork and then create a branch here, in this case in Hiroshi's name, with Hiroshi's username and then patch 297. And then the pull request itself includes a log of all the activity, and including the commit where the changes were made, which is right there with that red arrow. Pull requests can include many different commits for many different files. Then the PR log at the bottom contains both, automated and manually created messages. Automation for the merge engines as well, all the commits, all the conversation, all the notes from anyone who's been assigned to it. You'll receive an email anytime anyone uses your username with the @ symbol, and you can respond in conversation at the bottom here with the comment button. Once your pull request is created, both you and Microsoft can review the changes you're suggesting with a visual differential right here. Click on the Files Changed tab to see that in-browser diff, and you can see here red is the old code, green is the new code, and the changed characters are highlighted. And here we can see that someone has suggested a real easy typo fix, real easy to approve. If you still want to make more changes to the file, like a second commit, you can issue another one for the same pull request. Simply click on the 3 dots here on the right and then click on Edit File. Then you can make more changes, submit another change to the same open pull request. But after you've submitted your pull request and all your commits are in, you can just sit back. We've got it from here. And we'll let you know if we have more questions or have a status update. So those are your 3 options: product feedback, GitHub issue, GitHub pull request. Now, which is most helpful to Microsoft and what gives you contribution credit? Only the third option, only pull requests. That's actually what we want to see most. After your pull request is in, again, say hi to us on Twitter or use that hashtag in GitHub, and we can recognize you as a contributor there as well. So if you contributed via a pull request and we merge your pull requests into the document, even if we change it, you'll get your GitHub account picture and a link to your GitHub profile at the top of the document. The folks listed here are those inside Microsoft and externally who submitted pull requests to an article. And you can only get your name and logo on an article for a pull request, not for a GitHub issue. So if you're not sure how it should change, just give it a shot. If it's not quite right or formatted perfectly, don't worry. We will adjust it, but at least you've drawn attention to it and at least it gets fixed. For images and graphics, charts, etc., we have designers to get images updated in a standardized way, so there's no need to edit images yourself. Finally, capitalization is tough. The capitalization of various features and products inside Microsoft is one of the most nuanced bits that there is about publishing. Marketing marketing always wins these arguments, regardless of how product documentation evolved throughout its development process internally. Now, for example, we just had a big pull request come through to make a lot of capitalization changes. And unfortunately, they were mostly misguided. So again, that task is tricky enough when you have information directly from the inside sources. So we'll handle that part. And yes, if you spot inconsistencies between marketing content and documentation content and then learn content, you should know we're regularly discussing that and we're working on that stuff internally, but don't be afraid to point something out. For example, product names and features and phrasing are difficult to get just right. The trickiest is when there's a generic word in the product name. So just because we have a product called Azure SQL Database does not mean that every word database is now capitalized. This is even more difficult for our international partners and customers because capitalization often means a product or a service name shouldn't be translated, or it should be translated in a specific way. But a lowercase common noun of the same term should be translated. That inconsistency in capitalization confuses our translators, confuses our customers, so we want to get that right. So that consistency is important, and it's part of a core goal of our brand voice, which is above all to be simple and human. And if we can do better to meet that goal, please let us know. One last bit about contributions for localization issues, such as a translation issue. If you've got a translation issue to raise, those are actually all submitted by email now. And this process changed within the last year. So you can download an Outlook email template at this link right here, aka.ms.sitelockfeedback. Submit your feedback in any language, and it will be translated and routed to the correct localization team. Now, if you've got a technical issue with an article and you're most comfortable submitting your issue in another language besides English, no problem. Instead of creating an issue or a pull request in English, you can use that email template. It will be translated and then passed along to the same content teams, like our SQL Docs team. Either way, thanks for contributing and making Microsoft Docs better for everyone, everywhere. I'll pause there for any questions. Okay, here we go. We got one from Simon. In my experience, many docs issues I open end up with the product team getting involved, discussion or roadmap details. Do you see that as a conflict with the goals and use cases you mentioned? Not at all, Simon. A lot of times we do get the product team involved to review changes to their documentation. Some product teams are more hands-on than others, but we absolutely run our changes to docs by product teams. So we're talking to the project managers. That's likely happening for most issues, unless it's like a typo or something that we probably don't bring that up in front of the product team. Yeah. So absolutely, a lot of these things go in front of the product teams anyway. Any other questions? All right, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Let's talk about GitHub and how GitHub hosts docs for us. Now that you've seen how to contribute to using GitHub to Microsoft documentation, I'm going to briefly show you some inside information, some inside baseball, and talk about how we use GitHub to host Microsoft documentation. It might surprise you to learn that Microsoft Docs are not edited in Microsoft Word, but rather in code, in Markdown or YAML. We spend most of our time in Visual Studio Code or Azure Data Studio to edit them. We have other tools to help with automated link checking, syntax formatting, bulk updates, and a series of include files to tokenize things like product names. We have a rich set of metadata for each article. We do pay attention to how articles perform in terms of search engine optimization and traffic patterns and trends, all driven through Azure Analytics and Custo queries. We try to improve poorly performing articles. we use many metrics to track down the performance of an article, including, for example, if you copy text from an article, that's good. We see that. Or if you click, we don't see that. It's recorded as part of our SEO. Or if you click through or scroll or dwell, the same kind of metrics that any website uses to track how effective a web page is, without capturing any personal information or wider tracking information. For big article updates, we have systems to handle release branches for when we want to work on documentation for months and then release all of it at once during a keynote, for example. So here's some behind the scenes on how Microsoft Docs in Git works, specifically in GitHub, where all Microsoft documentation is managed. If you're new to Git and don't understand this, don't worry. As I've already explained, to contributors in the community, this is all managed for you. So here's the basic GitHub workflow. This may be a little bit of a deep dive if you're not familiar with Git or GitHub, but for those of you who work with GitHub, this might be interesting to you. So a repository like SQL Docs here we'll use as an example, but there's many other repositories. This is where the source is housed and where the website engine pulls Markdown to present live website to you. A fork is a copy of that repo in your account, in your GitHub account up in the cloud. We each on the document team have created forks of the repo in our GitHub accounts. A clone is a copy of a fork that's brought down locally. The files are literally copied to your workstation so that you can make edits to them. To tell the two apart, a common convention is to reference your remote fork as origin and the code base you eventually push to as upstream. These are called remote names or remotes, and these are just the common naming conventions. You can actually choose any name. You'll have an origin and an upstream for each repo you work in. When you make a change to a file or add or remove files, you'll create a working branch that is relevant to just the chunk of changes that you're making. You want a branch to contain only the changes that are specific to a feature or an issue that you're addressing, so that it can be treated as a block of changes to go back up the stream together. Your work goes into that branch, and here the branch is to fix an issue, and we have the ISO date appended to it. That's just a naming convention. When you're done, first the branch is committed locally to your clone. Then it's pushed to your origin in GitHub. Now it's actually off of your workstation. It's in the fork of code in your GitHub account up in the cloud. Then you issue a pull request asking Microsoft Docs, in this case, asking that SQL Docs repository to accept changes from your repository so that the changes can be merged from your fork into the main repository. To explain things a little closer to the reality of how we work internally, we actually have two repositories in the Microsoft Docs account for any given technology. So again, you don't have to worry about this if you're submitting pull requests from outside, from the browser. The SQL Docs repository drives the website, but like true professionals, we don't develop against production. We only develop in the preview repository, so SQL Docs-PR. That's not visible to the public, so don't worry about seeing it. And it allows us to work in and preview the merged state of all of our changes in an actual live repository in a preview website behind the scenes. This build process to the live website occurs usually twice a day and is gated by a team of build reviewers. But when you use github.com to submit changes in the browser, or if you use your own tools, you don't have to worry about that. Your workflow and all the validation necessary occurs inside the public SQL Docs repo or Azure Docs repo, or any of the other repos. And again, this same docs as code pattern applies to any Microsoft technology in Microsoft Docs. Again, if you can use github.com for all of this, but if you're interested in learning more about Git or GitHub, here's some really good materials on Microsoft Learn that can help you in your education. All right, just a few more slides to talk about what's new in SQL Docs, and then we'll go into Q&A. So in February, we introduced dynamic recommended content in the footer of many Microsoft Docs articles, and this is actually expanding through a lot of other repos right now. The links in the content are determined by a machine learning solution based on a model that describes customer behaviors with our documentation set. We've seen some really positive metrics on tracking traffic to recommended articles so far. So we actually think this is helping people find what they need. So, also new to Docs, you can add certifications to your login with docs.microsoft.com. This is a permanent association with your certification account with your Docs account to connect your certification profile from Microsoft Learn. If you go to your profile in Learn or in Docs, go to certifications and then click on Connect in the certification profile. You can get notifications for your certification renewals and a lot more, including a link directly to Pearson VUE to schedule the exams that you're pursuing. And I hope you'll join us on May 4th for, if you're in the SQL Server world, for an event, a live free online event called Innovate Today with Azure SQL. And you can register at AKA MS Azure SQL Digital Event on May 4th. And then Microsoft Inspire, the next big conference, is coming up July 14th and 15th. So thank you very much. We're now open for discussion. If there's any questions, you can pop them up in the video. I'm sure Cheryl has been engaging in the chat as well. Anything that we want to discuss? Thank you all very much for joining, by the way. And again, if you put in a pull request, use that hashtag ping MSFT docs to just wave hi to us, say, hey, you let us know by this presentation, or you can hit us up on Twitter and draw attention to your pull request there. And we'd love to recognize your contribution on Twitter as well. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I hope you have I hope you have had a great global Azure Austria. I understand we're the last time slot. It's probably been a long day of learning for some of you. I hope it has gone really well. Thanks for joining.